I am now in Sensei Format 2015. So your version of Blender may look a bit different, but all the stuff I'm going to show you in this video, you can still do the same so long as you watched the how to install drag and drop environments video beforehand and set everything up. And if you're a Sensei Format user, your version of Blender will look pretty similar to this with a few changes. So we've got our library button here. When we click this, we have access to all of our Blender assets. And so we're going to be clicking on the Environments tab. And you'll see here I've got some things. I've got a folder called Lighting, another one called Environments. The one called Skies is the actual folder of environments, the 12 environments that came with the drag and drop environments add-on. So we click that. We have all of our skies here. We're in Blender Renders, so if we switch that to Cycles Renders, we can click on any one of these and just bring them into our 3D view. And of course we can scroll down and do like that. So when I created this add-on, I made sure that whenever you drag duplicates of the same environment into Blender, it's not actually loading that same image twice, which helps conserve resources. So actually, if we click on the environments here, you'll see this says Sky02, and this is actually the name of the current loaded environment. You'll see that changes whenever we do that. Now we can actually select from any of the environments we've loaded right from here. So if I click this, you'll see the list of all the different ones we've recently added, and I can just click that and choose those. And of course this sets up the environment for Cycles as well as Blender Render. I'll just turn my library button off for now. But if I switch this to Blender Render and select my World tab, you'll see that indeed the environment is being set up also for Blender Render as well as environmental lighting and all those kind of things. So we have really quick, simple access to doing this kind of work here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to Cycles Render so we can be able to see the environment while we're in the 3D view. And so you notice that until we had an environment loaded, these controls weren't here, but now that we do have one, we have these controls. So what do these do? So the energy, that just basically controls the lightness and darkness of the environment, as you can see there. And color, yeah, you might have guessed what that does. It changes the color of the background. We can adjust the brightness, the contrast, the saturation, and etc. When I was developing this add-on, I quickly realized that I did not want to have to go back and reset these every time, so I made this reset button. So when you click that, it will reset all of those values to default, which is nice. This works a little bit differently if we're in Blender Render. So if I switch over to Blender Render, and we're on the World tab here, so you can actually see the world. So if I were to press Shift-A and add a monkey, and I'm going to press R to rotate it and Z to constrain it to this axis. And then if you're a Sensei Format user, you can just tap W as many times as you like to smooth your object. And so then I'm just going to hit D or Shift D if you're a regular Blender user. And so I just want to have a few things to look at here. So if I press Control B to create a render border and then Shift Z to render that, you'll see that the background is indeed there, and it's the full 360 environment, and as well as the lighting. So the lighting is awesome in Blender Render, but it can also significantly slow down your render. One of the coolest things about having these environments is the environmental lighting, but if you want to turn that off, you can quickly do that from the options. So if I press Shift-Z to stop this render preview, if I click my drag and drop environments options button here, I can quickly turn off environment lighting so that our renders go a lot faster. And then we also have the option to only render the lighting. So if I select that, you'll see it automatically turns on environment lighting because it wouldn't make sense without it. So if that's unchecked, it will check it for you automatically. And so now if I press Shift-Z to see a render preview, you'll see that we're only seeing the effects of the environment lighting on our objects, and if we were to render this, it would also render out like this as well. So this is a very helpful feature. So I'll press Shift-Z to turn that off. And of course, if we switch back to cycles, it will do the same thing in cycles as well. I'll press Shift Z to turn that off. Okay, so while we've got these options open here, let's go ahead and go through these and discuss what they all do. So we've already gone over the environment lighting and the only render lighting. So next, under add-on preferences, we have the option to display library option. Now, drag and drop environments, as you know, comes with this super cool, simple, but very powerful little library feature, which we set up in the previous video. But if for some reason you don't want that there, say you feel like it's cluttering up your workspace or whatever, you can just turn that off and then you won't have access to it, but you won't have to see it either. If you prefer not to use the drag and drop functionality, you can still load these environments manually right here. So if we click on this, we can actually load the environments directly from our computer instead of drag and dropping them. But I'm going to go ahead and turn the library option back on because I love it, and I love being able to see the preview images of these things and just drag them in here and use it. It's awesome. Under here, we have this remove file images. So Blender has this habit of, after you delete an object or an image or something, wanting to keep that object around within the memory of the file. And the reason for that is say you accidentally delete something you didn't want to, you can still press Control Z to undo that. Well, to be able to undo that, it still has to have access to that file. However, this sometimes can cause the Blender file to get cluttered up and resources to become low, or just a waste of resources actually. So if you keep this check marked, whenever you delete an environment up here, the add-on forces the file out of your current Blender file. Now it's important to note, it doesn't actually delete the image off of your computer, it just makes sure and totally destroys the association with that image so that it doesn't stay loaded inside of your Blender file, basically. And so we could just come up here and select one again. So next in line, we have load for cycles. So this pretty much does what it says. So if say you're just mostly you just want to use Blender render, and you're not really that much into cycles, and you don't want, when you drag and drop an environment or load it directly from the folder icon, you don't want it to create the node setup and do all the work it has to do when setting up an environment for cycles. You can turn that off, and whenever you drag and drop an environment in, it will only set it up for Blender render. But we want to keep that on. The next option, use mirror ball. The default setup is really the best. It's actually something called equirectangular, which is the type of maps that these use. And you're almost never going to use this. And also the equirectangular maps are very common type of maps, like you may have heard them called HDR, HDRI, that pretty much all other 3D programs use. So you want to keep that off. But it's still there, it's still available if you absolutely want your environments to be loaded that way. We can actually, if we click on it, we can see what this does, and as you can see, that does not look right. But if, for instance, you were using a mirror ball type map, you have that available, and you can switch it back and forth on the fly. So the next option you may think is a little weird. It says disable drag and drop. So dragging an image into Blender's background by default will load one of these background images. And what a background image is not a renderable or 3D world view environment image like this. A background image is basically just a flat reference picture. Like say you're designing a character or a car or something. It's something that shows up when you're in an orthographic view. So like that means if you're in front, back, right, left, etc., it will show up. So if you want to temporarily disable the drag and drop functionality so that an image that you bring into Blender, when you drag and drop into Blender, will load as a background image, you can do that. So for instance, we'll go ahead and select disable drag and drop, and I'll click library. Now when I drag one of these images, you see that it doesn't load a new environment, but if I press 1 to go into front view, you'll see that image available there in the orthographic view for the kind of blueprint referencey kind of stuff that the Blender's drag and drop images into the background work by default. So that's just there in case you want to quickly be able to use the default functionality. And then of course you can actually select both of these so that something you drag into here will load as both a reference picture and a world environment for both Cycles and Blender Reader. I don't know why you would possibly want to do that, but hey, it's available to you if you want. Okay, so that's pretty much that for the options. So I'm going to click that to close those up. And I press my up folder button, which goes up to the directory. You'll see I actually have these two other folders here, one called Lighting and one called Environments. So if I click on Lighting, you'll see I've got a lot of these really sweet lighting setups. These are basically just using the whole environment as very intelligent light sources to get different kind of lighting for your shots. So I actually got these off of DeviantArt, and I have a link to the artist's profile where I got these, which he has made these fully available for private or commercial use, so that's awesome of him. So if I drag one of these into our environment here, you'll see I have this light setup here. So if I press Shift Z, you can see we're just seeing the effects of this lighting on our objects. That's actually because I left the only render lighting option on. So if we turn that off, it would then render the objects as well as the environment there. But say we drag this cool looking red one in here. This probably produces some neat effects. And we could turn that on and press Shift Z. And this is how this would light this. The light's not doing a lot of bouncing, so let's press Shift Z. I'm going to press Shift A and add a plane so we can kind of see how this light is bouncing off of things. Press Shift Z, and that looks a bit more interesting. And of course, this works for Blender Render as well as Cycles, thanks to the magic of the add-on. But anyways, we have some really awesome, cool lighting setups. Like this is like kind of a garage car showroom environment. So this would probably be really cool on with a lot of metallic looking items. If we press our up arrow to go back, we have this other one called Environments. And you'll see here I have two folders, one designated for commercial use and one for non-commercial use. So most of the environments that you'll find to use, if they're free, they are typically non-commercial. There's a few people out there who are really awesome and have made some ones you can use commercially, but most of them are non-commercial. And that means that usually they'll let you use them, but you can't, not for profit, and you have to give them credit for your image. And you can find links to all of these in the description of the video to the original site and the owners. We have quite an amazing selection of environments that are really cool, and these of course go in all directions and are sweet. So one awesome thing about this add-on, not even just harvesting the lighting from these images or using the images in your actual renders, but just having a work environment made out of these images is really awesome. When I was designing the spaceship that is on the front cover of this video, I mostly used this Malibu overlook one. Because it's kind of a hassle to set up environments before this add-on, I didn't really do it that much, but now it's so easy to just get one of these environments and be able to actually model and work right here. I'll press my full screen button and my zero brush here. So yeah, it's actually, it helps kind of with creative flow. It helps with getting a kind of a, you feel like you kind of have a grounding with your environment, and your mind sort of accepts that you're looking into real space when you're focused on the object you're working on, more so than when you just have like a generic gradient or solid background. So that's one really awesome feature of this add-on. Even though these are non-commercial environments, just using them A, for their lighting, or B, to quickly get an kind of an imagination playground where you can design stuff is really awesome to have at your disposal, and it's a really excellent 3D tool. That pretty much sums it up. There's really a lot of amazing things you can do with this add-on. These are, of course, all things you could do with Blender and before anyway, but never with this kind of speed, fluidity, and just enjoyable way to use them. So I hope you like this add-on, and thanks for watching, and see you later.